Well, let's go ahead and start because it's already 9:01.
So I told Bridget, if you go, like, right? So I said, if you go the first 2 months of the year, I will take on November and December.
We want to welcome everyone here, and let's start with introductions. As we go around the room, let me know if there's anything in particular you would like to speak on and give us input on when we come to that particular item on the agenda. So I will begin the introductions by telling you I'm Janet Cannon on the State Board from District 8, and I will be chairing the meeting today. And let's go this way.
All right, I'm Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning, and I'm helping to fill in for Deputy Superintendent Norman's absence.
And I'm Carol Lear, a board member, District 7, Park City and Salt Lake City.
Let's see. Will you introduce yourself to us, please?
My name is Shayna Francis. I'm just here to observe, so I'm from Westminster, going into education with Honor and Tessel.
Welcome, Sheena. We're glad you would take your time to join us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
I'm Debbie Llewellyn with the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools, and we'd like to speak on the electronic devices that will be before the committee today.
Okay, great.
I'm Sarah Young, a coordinator for digital teaching and learning, here to speak to 3 of the agenda items today.
Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor here at the Board, State Board of Education, here to support all of you in everything that we discussed today.
Linda Hanks, I'm here representing Utah School Boards Association. I'm from JUAB School District Board, and
Do you drive in from JUAB, or how do you get there?
nope, I did. I drove in from Laverne this morning.
What time did you leave?
6:50. Carol and I were talking about this. If I leave after 7, I hit too much traffic and then I'm late, so I have to leave before, and then I'm okay.
Thank you for the extraordinary effort.
Right? I know. 9 is so much better. Don't start at 8.
Okay, Sherry.
I'm Sherry Reben, and I support this committee. Jenny Kravitz, a board member, and I represent parts of Weber and Davis County, District 4.
Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support here at the State Board, and Darren and I are representing Patty today.
Takes 2 of you.
It does,
Okay.
at least.
And I would just say that Patty said she would be listening in to us today with her angel ears because she's recovering from kind of a serious operation where they removed a tumor behind her eye. So she's down for 2 weeks, and she sent me a text message in our meeting yesterday saying, I'm here if you need anything. Oh, and we just need you to get better. So we appreciate her, and we surely wish her well. So we'll begin our agenda with our action item number 3.1, which is a competency-based learning framework. And Sarah Young is here to present that for us. So looking great in red today, Sarah.
I'm already listening to Christmas music.
It was for the you.
I waited until Halloween. For me now. Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. Sarah Young, Coordinator for Digital Teaching and Learning. So I'm here today to present hopefully a pretty big domino in regards to advancing our efforts specific to competency-based learning. So in the attached document, you'll note that we're presenting Utah indicators to measure competency-based learning program quality. So just to give a little background, competency-based education, specific to the code as well as our board rule, details a process of establishing 3 tiers of grants: a planning grant, then an implementation grant, and then an expansion grant. Those 3 components are meant to support LEAs in a process towards moving to a competency-based education model. The funds can be used specific to an LEA's needs related to professional learning, time associated with convening stakeholders, including parents and teachers, as well as being able to start implementing mechanisms that will help this shift, potentially related to transcripts and other components. In order for us to get that funding started with the release of planning grants, we're here today to present the measures as required by board rule. So the measures that we are presenting will be present then in both our competency-based framework as well as our competency-based education planning grant that we're intending to release in December. These measures will be allowed for LEAs to make selections specific to what their efforts are going to be. So you'll notice that we have stratified the measurements into three different groups. The first group being leading indicators. So these are items that can be measured and selected by LEAs as a point of measurement during competency-based learning implementation. Second component is primary indicators. So these are elements that we would look for our LEAs to select and measure once they've implemented for 3 years. And then finally, we have long-term indicators, which is really important in competency because a lot of the components we're looking at are specific to student success in post-secondary education as well, and the paths that they're able to take once they complete the K-12 system. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about these.
Okay, questions for Sarah?
I had kind of a embarrassingly simple question.
Sure.
Is the purpose of this, I'm not even sure I can say it very well, is the purpose of this to help LEAs develop programs so they can give students credit for like non-class kinds of experiences?
So competency-based learning is defined in code specific to 5 key pillars. And the pillars include student advancement based on demonstration of mastery of skills and concepts. It includes assessment that is meaningful or productive for students. It also requires interventions to be available for students who need additional components. It does address modifying the pace specific to the individual student's needs. And then last but not least, it also speaks to depth of knowledge associated with allowing students to go further into that. So in regards to does it translate to giving credit for things outside, that will actually still be an LEA-based decision, similar to the way that high school grades are. And it's something that we will support from the State Board of Education through the grants by establishing a network of LEAs that are working in this space so that as they're trying new practices, that can inform the larger statewide community.
Well, and that's, is that a yes or no?
So it's
Not
a
exactly.
maybe because we would be deferring to LEAs in regards to how they were building out.
But is this designed to, because I as I've listened to the competency-based discussion for 2 decades, a lot of LEAs have said, well, some of them say we just don't ever give credit for competency-based. When parents come to them and say, and there's lots of simple examples, but they say my child would like to get PE credit because she's an Olympic ice skater, and they say, well, we just don't do that because we don't have any metrics to measure that. We don't have any way to see if that satisfies the PE requirement.
Yes.
And some LEAs are much more flexible and say, oh, sure, that we can easily give you a PE credit for that. So back to my question, is this, and I understand the local control and it's still going to be managed by a school district or charter school, but is it designed to give the school district's charters some assistance in measuring that competency? Is that part of the design?
It will be part of it, yes. So it's not at this current time, but it is part of the kind of next steps that we're looking to take as an agency. So to take a step back to the larger kind of statewide view, we are actively working with the graduation task force on the portrait of a graduate at the state level. Once we've established that portrait of a graduate, That then gives our office the opportunity to be able to start developing what we are intending to call prototype competencies. And so by having a prototype competency, then we would look to support our LEAs on a local level, developing rubrics to achieve that competency. Okay. So, and those rubrics could be shared, but they could also be individual, specific to the implementation. And that once we have that in place, there could be mechanisms around better addressing similarities between LEAs in regards to what they're going to count and what they won't.
Well, or just giving them some confidence in saying, yes, we'll give credit for this, or we won't, or that, no, that isn't sufficient, something along those lines. But, and I'm sorry to belabor this, so I hope anybody else is. But the other piece of it might be just sort of creating more depth in the subject matter that's taught, developed. Is that the other kind of, that's probably the more important piece of it.
Yeah, so we, in our conversations with LEAs, because we already have actually several LEAs that are pioneering in this process, regardless of the state funding and kind of framework components. And one of the things that we have heard from them in regards to kind of your question is that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's like just going through.
LEAs, what you've heard from them regarding competencies.
So in terms of like the steps that they're taking, the key components are, number one, communication with parents, because it is a very different model than what we have currently been doing over history, and that's a key element. The second component is that a lot of times, sometimes in our conversations with competency, we run directly to, kids will be graduating early, and that's actually not what we're hearing in terms of from the LEAs, but they do see more students engaging in advanced level coursework, such as concurrent enrollment, AP, and IB, thus kind of setting the stage for success as they move into post-secondary settings. The last component is really specific around intervention. And so, there are times that I will say, even me as a teacher, I had to hand a child a test that I knew he wasn't going to pass. And the reason I had to do that was because I had a curriculum map that I was following in terms of where we needed to be. And the competency, in many ways, also provides a mechanism to be able to say to a student, so we're going to need to work with you in more intensive ways before we're going to ask you to perform at max rate.
I get it better now. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Jenny, you
and just kind of related, and maybe you don't know the answer yet because we're still kind of going through this, but is the goal or maybe part of the purpose to fast track some of these classes with students? Because I'm looking at one of the indicators like IB and AP, and it feels like, in a class like that, you go deep. You don't fast track critical thinking. And so in this competency-based, would kids be able to get done in half the time? Or would that just depend?
It does depend. Okay. I will say, because we are talking about modifying pace to an individual level as opposed to number 4 system level. In that regard, it is possible that students would be able to complete, but keeping in mind a couple of components. So one would be that the competencies and the rubrics that we're looking to develop are robust in regards to not just being surface level, a multiple choice test, but more so looking at the building of a portfolio. So now if you have a student though, and we've heard this from some of the students we visited with, who, has had a lot of great experiences, whether it's through family or additional, opportunities at the school, and has a proficiency already demonstrated in an area, that would also give them an opportunity, not just to say that's great that you know this, but unfortunately, I still have 2 more weeks left of the unit that we're going to be working on this. But it provides some additional mechanisms to either do more in depth and or to be able to advance.
Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Okay, so these are planning grants. Where's the funding coming from these? Or is this something we're going to be asking for funding for?
So that's a great question. So we are asking for funding for competency, but I'm going to differentiate the planning grants from the next stage, which is implementation grants. So the planning grant funding is already in place. It was allocated in 2017. And so this office has actually received that funding for each of the past several years. And so this will be the first time that we're putting it out into the field, because it took us a little while of having community conversations and kind of building capacity for the state to be on the same page to put this forward. So we already have that funding in place that is ongoing. So we're not asking for money for planning grants. However,
tell us how much it is.
So we receive $369,000 each year. $300,000 of that is for planning grants. $69,000 is for administrative efforts and technical support that we provide here at the State Board of Education. Then the second component, which you'll see on the board legislative request list, is a $2 million request for competency-based education. That would be specific to the implementation grants. So once we've awarded planning grants, the LEAs are required by code to expend those funds within a single fiscal year. At the end of that fiscal year, then they would be eligible to apply for implementation grants, and we want to make sure that that pathway and funding stream is in place so that as they enter into planning, they know that the next step, which is already articulated in code, has been funded.
Okay, and so is this a self-select when they apply for these planning grants? You're just basing it on who wants to do it?
Yes, we don't, I will say we've had a larger response from the field. We had 14 LEAs work with us in the development of this, as well as the framework and some other components. We were expecting 3 as per the original code. So it's larger than we originally anticipated. And so based on that, the advisory board will be evaluating the applications and then making a recommendation to the board. In the case that we receive more applications than we have funding available, it will be competitive, and we've designed our application to be scored that way.
I just had one other question. So this is how far along Utah is, I guess, in developing that. Are there other states that have done more or are further along with competency-based?
So yes, and I think it's been positive to be able to work with some of those other states to kind of do a lessons learned in regards to hearing from them about what was successful and what was not. One of the states that we've worked with is South Carolina. South Carolina has a team that's been implementing competency, and they actually released their prototype competencies earlier this year. And so we've kind of worked with them in regards to some lessons learned, which has been actually really helpful in terms of informing some of our efforts, including Portrait of a Graduate. There are some other states where it was implemented and in a way that said to the LEAs, you have to move to a competency-based transcript by this next school year. And there wasn't really state support associated with the planning and the implementation and those components. And in those states, we've seen them pull back just because the LEAs were lacking in kind of the resources and technical support to be able to execute the vision that was articulated.
Well, I don't know whether you know this or not, but my former governor, Mike Levitt, is a big fan of all of this that you're doing. And he was begging the state board years ago to please do this, please do this. And it was one of the tenets upon which they based Western Governors University. We have been joined by board member Elisa Ellis. We welcome you. Thanks for being here. Glad to have you with us. All right, so
I just have one more. Just to kind of put this in context for me, was this Senator Stevenson's brainchild originally?
So Senator Ann Milner has actually been one of our legislative sponsors. We have also worked with Senator Stevenson as well as Representative Hutchinson and a couple others who are Representative Moss who are interested in this effort.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so Sarah is looking for our committee to approve the metrics associated with the development of a planning grant associated with existing code 53F-5-5 and board rule R277-712.
And I move that we
Approve.
approve it and move it to the board
Okay,
for discussion.
the motion from Carol. Any discussion to the motion? Lisa?
Well, I'm not going to give a lot of discussion because I just got walked in the room and I don't know what's already been discussed. I do have some concerns with the competency-based ed model. I know that it can work for some students, but like any other program, nothing is ever a solution for all students. And so I just will take, anyways. So that's a concern I have, so I'll just kind of watch how it moves forward to see what it does. But that's all I just wanted to say.
Yeah. Okay, then we have a motion on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And go forward.
Great, thank you so much. And I think I'm your next item as well.
Oh, I think you are. Okay, so the next item is K3 Early Intervention Software Program. So, oh yes, I remember this one. Do you want to go ahead and report out to us on this?
Sure. So I'm presenting the external evaluator report that is required by code and board rule for Utah's Early Intervention Reading and Software Program. This is based on the 2017-18 school year, so last school year, and looks at a couple of key questions related to this particular effort. Number one is specific to how is the software being used in relationship to the recommendations from the software providers, or the word tends to be used, fidelity. And then the second kind of component is being able to look at and bifurcate the success of those different products related to the grade bands that they serve, as well as digging in even deeper, which is the length of the report, into specific elements of literacy and where they're seeing gains related to statewide aggregate data. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this. It is a pretty robust report. And that is it.
Okay. I did read through the report, and I guess what struck me was that the earlier the kids were utilizing the software and getting that input, the greater their gains were, and the gains seemed to lessen as they got into higher grades. So it seemed to me like early intervention was really something that could be targeted towards those early grades, or we got the most benefit from that. Jenny?
So, along with what Board Member Chair Cannon said, that in second grade, we didn't see the effect size, but also the sample size was so much smaller. And I don't know, the effect size was 0.16, and I know generally that's not very significant, and they compared it to other programs, but I didn't know, you got such a pretty big sample size, and so how do we know that's just not, luck or chance? And that's one of the concerns I had, because I want a program to work in literacy, but when I look at the statistics, 0.16 is pretty small, and I don't know if you can comment on that.
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, so there's a couple of components about the data that make some of the statewide analysis a bit challenging.
Yeah.
The first one, to your point about the differences in grade level. Mm-hmm. So as per code, this program is implemented by LEA request with all kindergarten and first graders who request those licenses.
That's why it's
whereas it's only for targeted intervention in grades 2 and 3. So it's not a class-wide treatment, although an LEA may choose to use it that way. We're only measuring students who at the start of the year perform below benchmark specific to DIBELS, and those are the students then that we're looking at for effect size. Mm-hmm. So they're just going to have a much smaller N size related to that. Mm-hmm. The second component is that we do have quite a plethora of software opportunities, not just in literacy, but also specific to the English language learners and that particular product. So for students who may be English language learners, they are, if they're using 2 products, we clean our sample to remove those students because we wouldn't want to attribute gains to an individual product when they're using more than one. So those are kind of some of the challenges around the N size, which then gets to the questions about effect size. The last thing that I would add is that at a statewide aggregate level, it's challenging because it doesn't take into account, it's a supplemental software. It's not primary tier 1 instruction. And so it doesn't take into account the tier 1 instruction. It doesn't take into account the teacher level of training. It doesn't take into account their basal reader series and kind of all the other elements that really play a strong factor in regards to the literacy outcomes we're seeing related to DIBELS. And so although I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the methodology and really the expertise of ETI in building an evaluation that is very robust given those challenges. I think the challenges are important to note in regards to outcomes and next steps related to the data they're reporting.
Yeah, I do too, and I just want to make sure that, you spend a lot of money for something like this, and is that effect size just chance? 0.16 based on the sample size. So I just wanted some reassurance that it's really working.
Well, so so I'm going a little off script here, but we are actually doing a pilot this year that's specific to creating what we call a personalized fidelity measure. This is for LEAs that selected into the space. And so the idea behind the personalized fidelity measure is being able to say, so rather than this kind of being like an autopsy report where we get to find out after the fact and on a statewide level, so that doesn't necessarily help our LEAs in terms of informing their individual next steps. These LEAs in schools are going to be getting data points, 3 points throughout the year that's specific to their schools, their teachers, and their classrooms that are using this data. At the conclusion of a year, we're then going to look at their data as a trend to be able to say, so first of all, is this working with your students? Specific to all the other variables you have in play. But second of all, is the recommended dosage really appropriate, or are you seeing gains at a different number? And if so, then the state board would bring to you, or pardon me, the staff would bring to the state board the opportunity to allow those LEAs to have an individualized fidelity measure as opposed to the single one-size-fits-all statewide treatment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're leveraging the Learn platform for that, and it's a mini pilot.
Oh, mini pilot. Thank you.
Good. Other questions?
Oh, just in the spirit of discussion, I was never a fan of this in the beginning. I thought it was way too much money, and it was kind of sold because, and it was Vanderbilt. It was flat out Vanderbilt. And I was kind of persuaded because it was targeted at low-income families and children. And then as it turns out, it's really not necessarily targeted that way anymore.
That's not a surprise.
Surprise. And so I'm still having a hard time being a fan of it. And now I also hear from my teacher friends who are reading teachers that reading on computers is different than reading on books. So that it's kind of a different skill set, and so it feels like the results are mixed. Is what you're saying, and it's how much money is now in this program?
It's like anything.
So it
works for some.
Yeah, it's funded at $7.6 million ongoing. Last year there was a conversation about, so at one point during the session, that was removed out of the minimum schools program moving forward, but it was returned by the close of the session.
Yeah, I'm just, because it's a Vanderbilt. Got people relying on it now. But I just, I guess I'm just still not necessarily persuaded. Here's my other main question that I had, 5 years ago or 6 when it started, and still have. So any students who, because this is a program for elementary students, are all the devices and the connectivity and everything offered to the families for free?
So, because you mentioned low income, I'm just going to do a quick differentiation of programs.
Okay.
So for our code related to the Upstart program is the low-income targeted one. And so this program actually doesn't have language specific to low income, just to differentiate.
the same program, but
Waterford provides services at a separate program to the Upstart program, but they are a provider for the K-1 licenses in this program as well, which I think kind of adds to the ecosystem. And so just to differentiate those components. In the Upstart program, the devices and the connectivity is required by code for families who do not or who qualify through income verification components. In this particular implementation for this program, it's in our schools, and so it's not intended for an at-home use in the same way that Upstart is.
So they don't need it. It's just a school-based program, and there's no requirements that it be. There's no home use requirements or.
Yeah.
So they
It'd be hard to study.
So all the materials, all the things they would need are available at school. They don't have to bring anything or.
Yeah, and we actually so as part of the application process, a year and a half ago, we added some additional requirements where, because it's a school-based application, so principals can decide, we have now asked that their literacy coordinators at the district level, their digital teaching and learning coordinators, as well as their IT staff, if that's different, all verify and vet the applications once we've received them. And one of the questions is, do you have a network and infrastructure through devices and such that supports these specific programs that are being selected, and we provide them the IT requirements so that they can make an informed decision.
That's helpful. Thank you. That makes me feel a little bit better about it. Thank you.
All right, this is an information item. So without other questions for Sarah, we will say thank you for coming and presenting to us. Good work.
Sarah.
It's green next month.
You're up.
There's no place to leave yet.
Join Sarah.
Okay. And Debbie Llewellyn, do you want to come to the table? Because I think this is the item, electronic devices. You want to have some input there?
So just as a reminder, this rule came to you, I believe, a couple months ago now, because it is up for its 5-year continuation, which is due in December, so we still have a little bit of time. The recommendation at that time from staff was to repeal the rule because of redundancies, and a lot of the requirements were found in other areas. In last month's board meeting, this was moved, the repeal was denied and sent back to committee to create some minimum standards around electronic device use in schools. So that's what I have attempted to do here. I will be very candid with you in that in paring down the old rule, it was difficult to pick out what should stay and what should go. So I'm very open to comments, suggestions, and edits. This is just step one. In presenting this also to this USSA, their comments back to us were, we do not see the point of this rule and we think it should also be repealed. So that was the comment I wanted to make sure I came in with this as well. Most of the comments from USSA were pretty much from line 32 down. They felt was too prescriptive. They wanted all of that deleted, and once you delete all of that, lines 22 to 30 don't really do much. So that's kind of where we're at with this rule, and I'm very open to comments and suggestions. I think we as staff are kind of trying to feel our way through the dark on what should stay, what should go, what makes sense. So we're very open to any suggestions or comments that you have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was the one that thought we needed this, and maybe if LEAs are saying we don't need this, then I'm open to rethinking that kind of.
But again, there was a vote on it by the board,
Yeah,
and the whole board went along with your point.
yeah, they did.
Because we thought maybe LEAs wanted it.
Yeah, well, I thought that, but I also, here's an interesting kind of, other kind of having worked with some LEAs on policies, it is something that's missing. And I don't know if they care if it's missing or know if it's missing or think they've handled it in other ways. I'm just kind of still getting a sense of that. So I'm sort of torn. And as I looked at this policy proposed rule, and you didn't put the old rule in here, Jeff.
Oh, it's not attached. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. And I didn't take the time to find it last night. I was just too tired. It felt like you were like feeling around in the dark for how to, and I got to be really kind about it.
Yeah, no, that's how I felt. As I was trying to write it.
And so it's not really what I had. That's not what I had in my head that I thought would be helpful. Things like minimum standards for that you got to have a policy that tells parents when devices will be taken from their children and how they can get them back, and set a standard that the parents can understand about if they can be used in the school throughout the day, or if they're supposed to, not be, if it's a teacher by teacher decision, if it's that's kind of.
So you want them to create a policy that's personal use protocol?
No, that would be part of it, and I don't necessarily. I just want them to say you should have standards about this.
Right. So I think you could create a simple rule that just outlines
some minimum standards.
Well, you could just say we ask you to create a rule. We don't have to tell them how to do it.
Because it varies from teacher to
device
teacher,
use.
from school to school.
Right.
And that's what I thought. Maybe that's okay.
It really does.
Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just where we are in the world these days. And I'm thinking back to the early days of cell phones in schools where it was really troubling to teachers. And
It still is.
So
Very troubling.
See, but I think that it goes to employees too. Are employees supposed to bring their cell phones? And if they have, what if they have materials on their cell phones that are not appropriate? They should be warned in advance. Don't bring a cell phone that has inappropriate materials to school. Period. That's the kind of thing I was thinking of in terms of minimum standards. Now, are they elsewhere in different places? Maybe. But it just seemed like one policy that says, here's some minimum standards, yes, and then now create a policy that has your version of these minimum standards was kind of fun.
I'm going to ask Debbie, because you want to do
what's
input on this.
What
So
were you
we
thinking?
support the staff's previous recommendation to have this proposed rule repealed. And looking at the one that went into effect September 1st, 2018, I think it covers a lot of that pretty well.
What is that one?
It's R277494, and if you go to -4,
Okay.
I think it covers what Carol was bringing up, potential disciplinary actions towards students or employees or both for violation of local policies regarding the use of electronic devices. We felt like that what's currently there is pretty good. So we support your staff's previous recommendation to repeal this proposed.
So saying that this additional rule is
We
unnecessary.
still like the one that's already in place is written pretty well.
But that's not the one. That's not the one that was proposed for repeal, then, either.
Yeah, this is already in current.
So, yeah.
This is already in current policy. What you're trying to do here is already covered pretty well.
So we don't need this one
You're saying you don't need this
You would just
additional.
prefer we continue the existing one.
and repeal.
So this one is 495, and she's referring to 494.
Yeah,
right?
495-4 policy requirements.
Oh, no. It already has
495-3
They quit
talks
changing
about the
this.
school's responsibilities.
They keep changing this website one.
I know.
I'm a little confused. So,
So we don't support this recommendation that you're looking at.
right, but I thought wouldn't this be, if we didn't vote to repeal, then what we're looking at is what's currently in place because we didn't repeal it.
Right.
So it's just,
what's in
so this was
place
just
is
certain
great.
sections that we were repealing, not the entire rule? I'm just trying to remember exactly.
The original recommendation was to repeal the entire existing rule.
495.
Because it was existent in other areas.
So you're saying you're okay to keep -4.
You don't want to repeal
To keep all of it,
494.
to keep all of 495.
Okay.
But I'm looking at 494, and that doesn't seem to.
No, it's 495-4.
Oh, 495.
It was 495-4.
Oh.
So she does not want to repeal 495.
But I thought,
She doesn't want
that's
to
why
add
I'm
to it.
confused.
Yeah,
That's why I
okay.
said you were agreed with last month to repeal the whole thing.
No, we agree with the staff's recommendation that what you're looking at today is not.
But not
The
last
new
month.
draft is
But see,
not-
that is what they proposed
To
be
repeal.
repealed.
Yeah.
No, we think that.
You think we need this one,
Okay.
You guys are okay.
but not change it.
But not change it, okay.
So the rule we
Sorry
have,
about that.
It's okay, I was
just
excited.
trying to make sure that I understood what you were saying.
Thank you for asking.
the rule that we have before us as a committee is 495, and it goes only up to -3. And then I'm looking over here at administrative rules, and I have 495-4 policy requirements, which is, I think, what she's referring to.
Yes.
So,
But what about 1, 2, 3?
so how does that,
Uh-huh.
so we only have a partial rule in front of us? Is that
So what
correct?
you have in front of you was, the idea was to repeal and reenact a whole new rule. So what you have is the draft of a new rule, because
Here.
the old rule was the one we recommended to repeal, and then it was sent back to committee and say, let's rethink that. So I took a whole new rule essentially to pare down the old rule into a new rule. And the idea would have been to repeal and reenact. So it looks like a whole new rule because, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I looking again at this, and I admit, I just had too much last night. I didn't look at this again. But looking at this again, I don't think 495 is that bad. I mean, could you not just take 495 and update it?
Sure. We can absolutely do that.
Does that seem
Why don't
crazy?
we do give it another go and bring it back next month?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I was going to say in the beginning.
Okay,
was-
so there's some issue with this continuation lapsing or something. It needs to be continued by December.
Okay. So if 495 as written, then if we want to keep it, is that what you're saying?
So the option could be to vote just to continue the rule and get that through the board, and then I can come back next month with an amended version.
Well,
Go ahead.
if it doesn't need to be amended, then I don't think we need to go through that. But maybe reach out to see if there's any recommendations.
Sure.
If we keep the rule, if there are any proposed changes that people in the community would like to see.
Plus, I mean, I know how long ago this was written, and things have changed so dramatically.
Yes.
Practices in
Let's
schools.
give Sarah the floor.
So I would just say that some of the conversations, so I represent for many other staff who have given input to this, including Dr. Whitney Phillips with Student Data Privacy, working with Director Talia Longhurst in CTE, as well as our IT Director, Jared, in regards to looking at this. One of the thoughts in the initial component is that some of this is duplicative and yet uses slightly different language than some components that are addressed elsewhere. So I guess my question and possible proposal would be if there are sections that are already listed in other code. So prior to, we had created a crosswalk of where it had been referenced just in other programs. But if we're very, very targeted and specific to code, where we can say like this language mirrors this language in code, that maybe that's a better approach, and so that we're not pulling things that are maybe programmatic elements like DTL, but we're really specific to what's required of all schools in code, and we bring back a draft with that crosswalk. What do you think about that?
Go ahead.
Yes, I like that. I thought you were going to say, we'll just leave all these places here, and I'd rather see,
Yes.
it all in one place than
It's easier to.
I would too.
Detective
That
get
was
off
my
the shelf.
rather incomplete thought last month. Is I'd rather see, even though I realize the staff have done a lot of work to find other places where some of this stuff is, or some or all of it is identified. I thought having one policy that said here are standards. If it would be helpful to LEAs, and I didn't want to have one more thing that they have to do. But the idea was that it would be helpful to say, here's what your electronic device policy. That's not exactly the perfect term anymore, but
Okay, so Jeff, help me. I'm still struggling here.
Yes.
I've looked up 495-4 in administrative rules. and that says policy requirements, and it seems to address these things that we're talking about.
Yes.
And then the draft rule we have before us stops at 495-3.
Yes.
So where are these policy requirements? Are they gone away? Or
Yes, so what I did is I pared them down into more generic language in
Okay.
-2 of the new rule and in -3 of the new rule. So I basically took the old rule and I condensed it. And what you would have voted on today was to repeal the old rule and reenact this new version altogether.
Okay. And so now we're saying, let's revamp this a little more
Yes.
and address the sections of code so that we have something that works throughout our system and is not specific to individual programs.
Correct.
Okay. Elisa.
I was just going to make a motion. I move that we continue R277-495 and bring back a draft. So continue R27495 to the board for full approval and bring back a draft in December's meeting with a crosswalk of changes that are addressed, or a crosswalk of requirements that are addressed elsewhere in statute.
And tell me when you're, in kind of, just to, because I feel the burden of being clearer than I was before.
Sure.
I know there are some things in here that are maybe too prescriptive in 495 as it exists now, that are too prescriptive, especially in today's technology world. And so I'm fine about getting rid of some of those, but I do think it would be helpful, again, having looked at some LEA policies that are not particularly helpful. This is not intended to be a burden for LEAs. It's intended to say, have a policy that tells parents and community members and students and employees in one place what are appropriate ways to deal with electronic devices. So is that clear?
Yes.
Clearer?
Okay.
And then Debbie, but going back to Debbie's...
Well, and let me just clarify my issue. We don't support the proposed rule that was here today.
Okay, good. Because I didn't like that either. Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah. No,
But we like you.
You're a great guy.
We like
not
Jeff,
you, it's
but
a
this
personality.
rule-
Sorry.
Okay, so
There we
we
go.
have a motion, and Jeff, I want to ask you about this motion
Sure.
in terms of timing. So Lisa's motion says continue 495 and bring back a new draft with the code. Is that your preference, or could we just bring back the new draft with code and have it work within the time frames you're working under?
Because it would come back to committee and then need to go to the board, it would go to the January board if we went that route, and we would be past the continuation at December 16th. So we need to continue the current version if you want to make sure there's no lapse.
Okay.
And then I will bring back a new draft that will be considered December here, January full board.
Okay, all right. So I think our motion works. Thanks, Elisa.
Good work.
Let's go ahead and vote on that motion then. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we'll look forward to some new rule writing.
A much better version, yes.
Yeah, and Debbie, thanks for your input. I think that helped us.
Maybe you want to talk to Terry and Jeff. Maybe you want to talk to Terry Shoemaker and say, what is it you don't like about this?
Sure.
Because rather than just saying it, if they're just bugged because it's another rule or another policy that's different than maybe some helpful ideas.
I'll do that.
Just off the side comment.
Okay, we welcome Brett Larson to the table. How are you?
Good, how are you?
He is here to present to us a new rule, R277-910, which is underage drinking prevention program. So do you want to go ahead and take us through this?
Sure. So just as a reminder, we were here last month discussing the underage drinking prevention program rule. Try and say that 5 times fast.
Is that a challenge?
And there was a great discussion regarding the reporting requirements that were in this rule around the data we would want to collect in order to report to the legislature, and LEAs having some concerns around an additional report. So we took that into consideration and created this new version. It starts on line 45, where
Would this be draft 2?
This would be draft 2, yes. Where you're going to see that we would move most of the reporting into the assurances document that is already in existence. We'll just get some yes/no questions of, did you have an instructor trained by the state? Did you offer the course? And then an additional option for them to list which course they incorporated it into, or if they had it as its own standalone course. This was presented to USSA. They were very pleased to see their feedback incorporated into the edits. So that was one section of the discussion. There was a separate area of discussion, not really related fully to the rule, that I'll let Rhett speak to about the online component and offering of this program. So,
Thank you.
So I'm going to have Zach come to the table. I want to, if that's okay, I want to.
Welcome, Zach.
So last month, as I was reporting, staff, we had recognized, and started conversations in September with Botman on providing materials online, and the procurement was in process and ended the day I reported to the board. And with being new, I didn't know if I could or could not speak to that publicly, and so that did end that day, which is why I wanted Zach there. So the contract was amended. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, because when we originally did the solicitation, it was current with the code as written at the time, but since the code had changed, adding that additional online delivery method, we did a sole source indicating that we were going to be adding a new delivery method to the contract, and as Rhett had indicated, that sole source posting did close on October 4th on the last board meeting. We did not receive any objections or contests to that. So we moved through that amendment process and had that as a delivery method for this program.
And conversations have already started between Botman and some schools regarding that and working out those details.
Wow. Popular.
Yeah, we never nobody ever comes.
I know.
They're here for the CTE course.
So I just
I don't know. You're here.
Just
But that
looking
was
at it quickly, I just had some, grammatical concerns. So is we would be sending this to the board, right?
yes.
Program is,
51 state level hyphen.
You said what?
Oh, on line 51 state hyphen level.
Yeah,
I'm a hyphen person.
yeah, me too. But I was looking at lines, must include line 45, starting on line 45. If the underage was offered to students, you need some time period in there. On line 47, was offered to students in grade 7 or 8 in the last 5 years, sometime. I mean, so some time period in there. And then I'm trying to figure out what you want on B, the course for the underage drinking. Do you want the name of the course? Do you want an outline of the course? Something on line 49.
Would be the name.
Okay, then just maybe clean that up. The name of the course or the where it was offered, and then comma after offered then on line 49, including if it was offered as a standalone course. And if an instructor attended as drop that has the state level training for the under, and then that's where you put in the hyphen for the underage students. So then
And on line 51, I'd rather have it say if the instructor.
attended.
We want the instructor to be specific to the program, not just the instructor.
Might have multiple.
They might have multiple.
Yeah.
Okay,
So then you'd need an apostrophe S.
instructor, yeah.
Or I'm not apostrophe.
You need a paren.
I'm up
Take out
we have apostrophe anxiety.
Yeah, we do. Instructor with the apostrophe S.
Okay, there's nothing in the statute that I can see at my quick glance that requires them to send someone up to Salt Lake for training, right?
Correct.
And so by changing that to instructors, you're now saying every teacher that ever teaches this needs to come to Salt Lake for a training, or they may feel like that because it's in an assurance document. And I'm not particularly comfortable being that prescriptive to the local schools because we offer the training, but they may not need it. And so I would, if we do that, we need to make sure that it's explicitly stated that it may not be required.
Can I speak to that? In order for a teacher to teach this,
They have to, yes.
be trained.
Yeah. But do they have to come every year?
No, it's a one-time training.
And,
Yeah.
And then
and
maybe
state
put
level
that in
training
there.
doesn't necessarily mean they have to come to
Yeah,
Slate.
No,
Yeah.
we've branched out and we've traveled around to provide that for LEAs.
And if I may, we also have on the contract that they can do an online training
Yeah,
course
okay.
as well.
Thank you. That's all. I just wanted to make sure.
Would it be reasonable to include those options in the language of the rule, so that they're clear that it doesn't have to be a face-to-face training, it could be online, or you're going to do a road show or whatever, whatever the possibilities are, so that they know what to expect. In that, I think that would be a good addition to it.
Chair?
Yes.
And I would still like to be able to really look through this course because just looking, thank you. You got me. But I'm just looking at the statute and I understand we went through a procurement process and I don't understand everything that went into it. But the statute is specific to underage drinking and prevention, and I still am concerned about the vastness of the course and how many topics it covers outside, above and beyond just strictly underage drinking and driving under the influence. And I understand that there was a comment that all these other things lead to that, but I just don't know if that's really what the legislators were looking for. So I just want to make sure we aren't, again, requiring too much. So, and if they could pick and choose, so maybe an LEA wants to offer this full thing, or is it an all or nothing course, or can they focus in on the chapters that are specific more towards underage drinking?
So again, when I spoke with Rick earlier, he indicated to me that there are 11 sections that they deal with in junior high and 15 that they deal with in high school?
Yes, yep, 11 in junior high and 15 in the high school, that's correct. And it is in general, Botvin's research is on decreasing underage drinking, and with that program has those multiple lessons. And I look at it as a program that is targeted for underage drinking but has other benefits. And it does align with with Utah's core standards, and most have implemented it in health, and it does match, there's a crosswalk that I have that shows that it crosswalks with a lot of the health standards. And so the teacher that I spoke with last week in a visit, one comment that she made was, it's nice to have things that we're already teaching, but it's providing evidence-based strategies to do that. And so I thought that was great feedback but it was one teacher that I met with that like that. To pick and choose, I think would probably meet the requirement, but would decrease the fidelity and the chances that this program actually has to make it work.
And it is a show.
Right. And this is just more, I understand it's in statute, but this is more of a personal philosophy that the schools often are told to go above and beyond the scope of this is educational, but is this really something that should be taught in the school, or is this something that really should be taught in a home-centered place? And I'm more of the opinion that we stray too far, put too many demands on what the schools are supposed to be educating that really are responsibilities of our homes.
Can I comment to that? I appreciate that, and I am on board with you to that. Where this came from was
But I know it's in statutes.
But where that even came from was the increase showing in the SHARP survey data.
Right.
The increase,
and I'm not a fan of the SHARP survey.
I just know that that's where they got that, and so I know that there's a need for it. But looking at all the sides, I understand where you're coming from for sure.
And you did tell me that this program has some 30 years of evidence that it does reduce the use of harmful substances.
Yes, underage drinking. Yes.
There is a need.
Well, of course. Yeah. But does that mean we then require everybody and take more out of the home? And because, anyways, it's a big, long lecture I could give you. Not in a negative way, just lecture as in I have a lot to say about it.
Right. Okay, so we have given you some amendments to draft 2. Have you noted those amendments so that they'll be...
Is there some urgency in this? Can we... I don't want to put everything off till next month, but
I think there is, because it was statute this
Yeah,
year.
it's
If we
already-
start the
it
next
should have
session
already-
without
yeah.
moving, then
then
we get in trouble.
let's take care of it. So, okay.
Okay, so then our motion should be approval of R277-922.
As amended.
Should we say draft 3, which would be include the amendments we've made here?
Isn't it 9:10?
Excuse me. Let's see. Did I say,
Yeah,
what did I say?
9:22. I was making sure.
Oh, why did I say that? I have 9:10 right
Like
here.
22
Oh,
better than 10.
sorry. I have it wrong on the second line.
You might have
9:10.
been looking at.
Okay, so let's approve R277-910 draft 3, which includes the amendments we've made here today, on first reading and forward a recommendation for approval to the board on second and final reading. Yes.
Sorry, you may have incorporated this in your motion, but I was thinking while you were doing it. But did you incorporate in your motion Carol's request for
The
grammatical changes?
Yeah.
You
She
did.
said the amendments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so
I just-
that's why
She
we
said
said
draft three.
draft 3 instead of draft 2, because draft 3 will include our amendments.
Yes.
Oh, one more question I had, and it just, I kept coming back to it, and it's letting oh, who are the 2 board members who are on this?
I'm on it.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, but we haven't met for a long time.
And who's the other board member?
Kathleen.
Oh. Okay.
All right, then I will place that motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that online.
Maybe she had to.
And Joan, let's see. So we are looking at course standard approval. Kalia is joining us. And do you want to present this item to us?
I would be happy to. Talia Longhurst, Director for Career and Technical Education here at the State Board of Education. We are here today to present a rotation of Cte course standards to you. I wanted to introduce, my apologies for coming in early. You guys are moving fast today. We're watching upstairs.
We do.
And I wanted to come in as you were switching agenda items, but you're fast today. So I wanted to have some of my staff members introduce themselves. They're here to answer any questions you might have. Let's start with Doug.
Doug Livingston, Technology and Engineering Education Specialist. Aaron Bodell, Skilled and Technical Sciences Education Specialist.
Brecken Haywood, Business and Marketing Education Specialist.
Now tell me your name, first name?
Brecken.
Oh, thanks.
What a fun first name. I've never heard that before.
Michelle has a son named Brecken. Yeah.
Brandon Jacobson, IT Education Specialist.
We have 3 specialists who are not with us today. One is out sick, so Wendy will be representing him. Wendy Morton is one of our Cte coordinators. And then I have 2 vacant positions. One is actually filled, but he won't be starting full-time until January. We're stealing a teacher out of a classroom. So we try to make it easy for them to break away. And then the second one, we just had a retirement this week, and so we'll be filling that position in the coming weeks. So what you have here for Cte courses, as you might remember, these courses are very much industry-based. We work very closely with subject matter experts, industry representation in designing courses and updating these courses. And so we are on a 3 or 4 year schedule. Sometimes we'll pop in with additional changes on a more rapid basis, depending on how things change and move. But what we have for you is the courses that are up for review this year and the changes that have been made. Each of the areas has a summary sheet on what sorts of changes were made to those courses, and you've got each of the course standards. You'll see us come back every year with a new set of courses. We group them by career pathway. And that's what you're seeing. So we would be happy to take any questions.
Tell us what career pathway we are looking at today.
So that's a great question. And now that you said that, I was actually going to do a summary, a 1-page summary for you, and you reminded me that I didn't get that done. So you're looking, thank you for that reminding. You're looking at a couple, you guys may know more quickly right off the cuff than me, business
Business management, entrepreneurship.
Brandon?
IT Systems Information technology systems.
Wendy, do you know Buddies right off the top?
No.
It's one of the ag.
Ag mechanical science.
Advanced.
Thank you.
There we go.
Doug
Architectural design and some new ones.
and Aaron.
Construction trades, manufacturing.
And then for health science, you're looking at medical forensics and biotechnology are the two current clusters.
Lisa?
I just think it's fun to have so many different options. I saw in Wasatch County, they have their program that they partner with through the college, and they have the board. Have you seen that?
The sim lab.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So our kids all need at least 1 credit of CTE to graduate. What typically do they take for that credit?
Anything and everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they can go any direction they want, and there's not one that's typically popular.
Well, we do have one course that is probably our highest enrolled course. I know you're going to be surprised when I tell you this. It's Foods 1. However, what we need to do a better job of is getting kids who are really truly interested in culinary arts and food science to move along in that pathway. But we have a lot of kids who are taking Foods 1. Why not take a class where you can bake?
I have a friend who teaches that at middle school above Wasatch Boulevard. Now I can't think of the name of it, but anyway.
I just have to say, with the new career teacher pathway, it's been so fun this year because we have a high school next to where I teach, and the kids are coming down, they're starting that coursework, and that's been fun to see that implemented, and they're excited. So I'm hoping we're growing some teachers.
That's the goal.
Anyway.
So tell us a little bit about kids that are involved in your program versus kids that are involved in CTE programs at a post-secondary level, and how many you train and how the others are getting trained in that kind of thing.
You bet. What I'm passing out to you is a document that we put together every year. We call it our CTE at a glance document. It's based on last year's enrollment data. So again, board member Cannon mentioned that CTE 1 credit is required for graduation. We have lots of students who kind of explore and take a class here and a class there for whatever reason, whether it's the chocolate chip cookie effect or something else that they're interested in. But what we're trying to do is help students early on, starting in 7th grade, to really understand what options are available to them and then how they can start moving down that pathway if they've made a decision or have some ideas about what they might be interested in. And I'm going to throw this in. When I was in the schools teaching, as important to me was helping students understand what they don't want to do. So sometimes that's as important. You never want to end up with a student enrolling in medical school who realizes that they don't like blood or they don't like people or whatever. And that happens. I have friends.
They just become.
So the idea is to really help them start to think seriously about what they like, what they're good at, and then find courses, whether it be at the high schools or taught by our post-secondary partners that they can get into that will really help them start to make some progress down a pathway that they might be interested in, or at the least gain some skills that are transferable to whatever they end up choosing down the road. So this last year, school year 17-18, the LEAs, the high schools, they provided, that's the word I'm searching for, provided 92% of all CTE for our secondary students. 8% of current technical education was provided by our post-secondary partners. We have some schools with a college right next door, a tech college or whatever that might be, Snow College or CU Eastern down in the central and southern Utah areas, where they can literally just walk across the street or hop in their car and drive down and participate in college-level coursework. And so 8% provided by post-secondary, 92% provided by the LEAs themselves.
Talia, is the 92%, does that include like DATC, those?
That's the 8%.
That's the 8%.
And so, I don't know if you would have any of this information, but do you have an idea? We have kids going to college and graduating with college degrees. Do you have any idea how many kids are getting these kind of certification skill degrees in our state?
You bet. So on the back, on the back
This
side,
is great. I love this.
Very cool.
on the back side, you'll see our credentials of value. So we have both third-party certifications and state certifications that we offer, and those numbers are right there for you. the legislature is kind enough to give us some money for the current name, I'm looking at Wendy and Brecken, Microsoft Imagine Academy. It used to be the IT Academy. Yes, so the new name is Imagine Academy. So we have a line item that we send out to the schools, licenses and vouchers for students to take various Microsoft, Adobe, are they doing Adobe?
NTA, yeah, technology, Adobe.
Yep, so Brandon and Brecken could speak much more clearly if you have additional questions. But when you look at third-party certifications, that's why some of those MOS certifications, Microsoft Office Specialist certifications are up high, because we get additional funding to help schools do that with students. But those are amazing programs.
Chair?
Yes.
I have a technical question. So, do these go out to public feedback like our other standards, or these ones aren't required?
We have not. They're not required by statute to do that. They're currently not required in board rule to do that. We mainly, in the past, we are happy to do whatever you prefer, but in the past we've really worked with, again, subject matter experts, post-secondary partners, and industry partners to help drive what.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And do you have a feeling for how much money kids can make when they have some kind of skill certification versus just a high school diploma?
Sure, it varies obviously by the type of certification. This would be anything from food handlers permits where they can go work in the food service industry to culinary arts as a chef, which we have many students coming out with ProStart certifications or other culinary arts. That would be great. Brandon and Brecken, any idea if you had a MOS certification, what that might get you, or some of your other IT certifications?
So I can speak to the MTA, which is Microsoft Technology Associate. That's your database, security, network, and as well as some of the Adobe certifications, or Photoshop, Illustrator, and Design. What they do is they highlight your resume a lot better, and by showing that certification, it allows a student to be able to start at a much higher paying job. Right now, we're currently, we just barely went to Adobe Max, my colleague and I, and they gave us this income analysis brochure, and it's starting at $45,000 to $50,000 for junior associates.
Goodness gracious.
For two to three certifications or higher in the industry. So those are the low to middle grade, all the way up to, it all depends on how talented you can display your talents. Right?
Students can earn, is it ASE welding? No, ASE is, yeah, auto. So what's the welding certification? AWS, I knew it started with the name. Those students who come out with that welding certification are probably looking at, I'm looking at you guys.
I would say probably 70 plus.
Oh, starting.
Some of the welding students they don't finish their training because they're picked up by industry in the middle of training. So
That's great.
it's an interesting industry.
Board member Michelle Bolter's son has gotten a certificate in welding and is deciding whether to do that or go into architecture. And you said, what kind of architecture?
He graduated from one of the colleges down in.
Yeah.
So I would guess it's more than a certificate.
What would the architecture be versus, I know the University of Utah has an architecture degree. What kind of thing do you offer in architecture?
There's a whole range. So you would look at some that are just interested in learning the CAD skills of making drawings, all the way to those that are going to continue on up to you get a master's degree in design of commercial buildings. Anything in between.
Okay, so they have like skill certificates for architecture, and they would do something under an architect degree?
Yeah, which is typical to the industry. You usually work your way up through on the job
Getting
that experience.
All right. So other questions from board members? Do you feel like you have enough background on this?
No, I'm just trying to find the statute about standard setting because I'm a little concerned about not putting anything out for public feedback. I mean, obviously, they can comment between now and next month, so that's what I'm going to go for. But
okay, and as I understand it, Cte course standards are driven by the business and the industry. They're meant to be very flexible to answer the needs of whatever state the needs the state has to provide people to provide those jobs. So they're a little different than other standards that way.
We also work with
People in the
Department of
community.
Workforce Services and the Governor's Office of Economic Development as we develop these to partner as appropriate and make sure that we're doing the things that industry and business are asking for. Yeah.
So they're really looking to answer the needs of business and
You don't even,
workforce.
go ahead. So you don't even post these for a period of time?
They've not generally gone through a public comment period as your other standards do.
I don't want to make your lives harder, but I guess I can see the value in posting it for a period of time. I don't know. Just thinking out.
So this is a new process that we're going through. If that is something that you want to add in, then we'll need to work a month earlier than we have before that will.
Yeah, and the industry changes so fast.
Right.
And various. I mean, you've got a whole bunch of different industries, so I don't want to cramp that style.
Right, and quite honestly, I've had some of the same concerns as I've thought through how we do this. Do we need to put it out for public comment? It would be difficult for me to respond to a person who wanted to make a comment or see a change made when it didn't align with industry.
Right.
That would
Because
be
it's driven by industry, not by what you want
However,
necessarily.
there are people in the public that work in the industry and maybe aren't part of an association, part of the government workforce services, and so outside of the government, there's a lot of people that have.
So we do have a process in place. We work with a vendor. We have a contract for a standards rating tool. And so all of our standards are posted online, and anyone can go in and register as a user and go in and make comments and provide feedback at any point in time about any of our core standards.
Well, that needs to be more publicly known, and if we can help share that, then that helps address some of it.
Do you sometimes make changes to the standards based on that?
So it's a new process. You just allowed us to sign that contract a couple of months ago. So we're just starting that process. I'll know more in a few months, but yeah, that would be the idea.
That's interesting.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to approve the CT's course standards as submitted in this year's rotation, and then forward a recommendation for approval to the full board.
I move that we approve the CTE course standards as submitted in this year's rotation and forward recommendations to the full board.
Thank you, Jenny. Is there any more discussion to her Jenny's motion? Then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Thalia.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for, I'm thinking, gosh, I want to go take a Photoshop.
I know, it would be so fun.
My son-in-law does that stuff. If adults want those classes, do they take them at the ATCs? And they're not called ATCs.
Yeah. There are various options for adults,
including
that colleges as well as community.
Okay. That's my son-in-law needs me to tell him where to take classes.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd appreciate that.
I want you to know about these classes.
We do have a summer conference where we have one expert teachers and expert industry people.
Oh, that's
they want
cool.
to pay $40 to come for a 2-day, they fully can.
Wow.
That sounds like a bargain.
Yeah,
And
it does.
they get free certifications that they have.
Well, good, but I always think everybody should always be school.
Maybe you could go undercover as a high school student.
Well, I wouldn't make any sense to me, but no.
Okay, so Jeff is back and Courtney is here with us.
He's had such a good time here.
We are looking at, this is a new rule, isn't it?
Yes.
So RG 77-912, law enforcement related incident reporting. So it looks like there was a Senate bill that requires this particular item. So maybe you can fill us in with some background on that.
So the last legislative session, Senate Bill 198 was passed by Senator Andrade, and that is a bill that essentially requires LEAs starting July 1st of 2020 to start reporting to the State Board of Education incidents that involve law enforcement on school campuses or during a school-sponsored activity. The legislation also requires that we write a rule about an annual report that we will produce, providing aggregated data on what we gathered from those reports from the LEA. So this rule is has been written to basically comply with the statutory requirements that we create a rule that discusses how we're going to compile that report and what we're going to do with it.
Okay, so reporting requirements, it looks like the LEAs work with the superintendent and relevant law enforcement agencies and school personnel to collect incident data. And the incidents they're reporting on are arrests, other law enforcement activities, disciplinary actions as defined in code, all other data as outlined in code. Can you fill us in on what all other data and the other law enforcement activities would be?
So I pulled up on the screen here Senate Bill 198. Those are the code references with the rule.
Yeah, but it's too far away.
But it's on your
Yeah. Oh, I know it is. I'm just trying to, thank you. Thanks, Chloe.
So you'll see if there are line numbers on the page you have, I'm not sure if there are, down in line 60 of the bill itself, you start seeing what the report is going to require. So line 64, 5, and 66 are the arrest of the minor, other law enforcement activities, and disciplinary action. Disciplinary action is defined by this code. So I'll quickly jump up there just so you are aware. Disciplinary action means an action by a public school meant to formally discipline a student of that public school that includes a suspension or expulsion. So this is going to be tying in some of the incident data we already collect from LEAs. And then also you'll see down in line 70 to 77 in the bill, not the rule, up here on the screen. They want all this other type of data, and then in lines 80 to 84, they want the data separated out by age, grade level, race, sex, and disability status. So those are all the things that the LEAs are going to be required by law to collect and provide to us.
Lisa.
Sorry, this isn't necessarily in the scope, but I appreciate this being here because I had someone reach out to me asking me if there's an appeals process for when the student is suspended. And I didn't know where to look, and so I think maybe you might know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I might defer to Corby on that.
When you say appeal process,
yeah, so if a school suspends a student, do they have any recourse to appeal it or to?
It's on their own LA.
Yeah, I was say, they do it all the time.
So there's not a state one.
They usually.
But is there a state level directive that says a board shall have an appeals process? So some may not.
I think there is in that student discipline statute or section.
Sorry. I thought maybe it had to do when you said suspension.
No.
And I'd be happy to look into that for you. Absolutely.
I think it has to include appeal. I mean, due process requires a rights process. So the statute doesn't have to say that it.
But they could still ask for it.
They have to have an appeals process for suspension or expulsion. But it will vary from district to district.
Sorry, I don't have a question about this.
I have a bunch of concerns, and I'm looking at help. Thank you for letting me. I'm not really agile at getting both of these things on my screen. So I'm looking at line 18. It says, and it's the same from the law, so that was good to know, that occurred on school grounds while school is in session or during the school-sponsored activity. Arrests of a minor, okay, and other law enforcement activities. That is so broad, and that's the exact same language from the statute, but how is an LEA to collect, and I realize they're working with law enforcement, who isn't always as cooperative as we would have them be, but collecting other law enforcement activities, is that that happened on school property? Is it? It's not as clear to me that the other law enforcement activities is limited to on school property while school is in session or during.
So that phrase is defined in the statute on line 37 of the bill.
Okay.
Is where that definition begins.
Will you read that to us? Other
Law enforcement. It means a do your control plus thing. Other law enforcement means a significant law enforcement interaction with a minor that does not result in an arrest. including a search and seizure. That is just, and I realize this is a statute, but oh my gosh, this is just.
And there has been concern voiced in discussion with USSA. There was some concern that the relationship with law enforcement agencies in certain areas, especially in rural areas, may not be one where they're going to willingly hand over this information to the LEAs. So there is concerns about how do we implement this statute, let alone
with any, see, this is one of those examples. Sorry, we've got a little time. We just go off on this a little bit. This is one of those situations where schools are being told to do stuff, and they're not going to get accurate information from school to school because the law enforcement, if it's still under investigation, they're not going to release information. And sometimes even if it's closed, it takes effort to get that information from law enforcement. So I think we're setting ourselves up to have, and also how does this work with charter schools that may have different law enforcement. They don't have SROs as commonly, maybe some of them do, but they don't have a certain area that law enforcement. I just think this is a recipe for all kinds of bad things.
So one thing to note is this, the report will not be required to begin until July 1st of 2020. So we do have time to work with the legislature to amend this statute and get some feedback from LEAs, which is what we're currently in the middle of doing. Trying to make sure that we get all that done. Unfortunately, because of the Administrative Rules Act, we do have to create the rule now because the law did go into effect in May, which only gives us 180 days to create a rule required by the statute. So we do have to write a rule that no doubt will likely be amended if this statute is also amended during the next session.
Could we make one amendment on line 20 where it says other law enforcement activities, which just seems so broad to me? Can you put in there as defined in
and put the section there too?
Because I think that will be helpful.
There were a few other grammatical things.
Okay.
An LEA shall collect the data. That wasn't it. Okay.
Okay, so here on line 23, I said, an LEA shall collect the data in a form agreed upon by the superintendent and relevant law enforcement agencies. So that at least gives us one form to deal with for everyone instead of everybody creating their own form, and who knows what would happen there.
I have a question. That's what I was just looking at. Well, not exactly the same place, but just the superintendent. I always have concerns because it feels like boards aren't brought into discussions often enough, and that we're just relying on administrative staff to take care of it, which is fine, but also not fine because they're not accountable to the people as readily. So I understand that, and we do it here too, that the superintendent works for us and yada yada, but I still feel like when it says specifically the superintendent, then we don't hear about it, but we do hear about it from people, and then we don't know what they're talking about because we've given them license to not ever even have to mention it to us. So I have a concern with that. I don't know a better way to.
So you want to just say that the report shall be provided to the board annually, something like
yes,
that?
Yes, I would prefer that, or superintendent and the board, but yeah, the board annually would be good.
And just so you know, it originally stated school personnel, and
I saw that.
USSA actually made the recommendation to scratch that out and put the superintendent. They wanted the administrative staff here at USBE to be the ones to create some uniform.
Here's another, just a grammatical. Go ahead.
Sorry, so just back to that same, so like in line 16, if it said an LEA shall work with the superintendent, that's fine, but then I would like the report to at least come to the board.
To the local board or to the state board?
I don't know where the line is, so.
And the LEA should report the data compiled to the superintendent, and she compiles the report by November. And an external entity may request access to the data used to compile the report through written request.
And I can provide some context for those sections at the end.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's a place we could put in there that the superintendent's report will be presented to the State Board of Education, or is that what you would like?
It can just go in the consent calendar, just so that we.
Yeah, I don't want to present it. I just want it available to the board.
Yeah.
All right, how should we amend this to put that in?
I'm trying to find the spot.
You could just put.
So line 44, with the request for data.
No, that's somebody else, which I want to talk about in a minute too, because I don't think the law requires that kind. I think this information can just be available consistent with grammar. It doesn't need to. We don't have to have a separate section time period process. Just start early on to say. An external entity on line 38. An external entity may request access to the data consistent with the GRAMA, GRAMA, and then that statute there.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything that says the 30 days.
And then, so that simplifies that a lot. What about on line 36? The report should be compiled no later than November 1st of each year in which the school year ended and provided to the board.
Yeah.
And provided to the
Not
board.
presented, provided.
On line 37.
It could even be.
The report shall be compiled no later than November 1st of each year.
Consent.
And made available to the board.
Made available or provided to the board or made available?
Either way. Yes. And then here's another little technical. Jeff on line 33. Superintendent shall compile the data consistent with the requirements of, or in accordance with the requirements of. Don't get all hung up on an aggregated report. That just so there's that. And then there was one other thing like that. Same with line 29. An LEA shall report the data to the superintendent as prescribed by the superintendent.
I'm sorry, which line was that one?
Line 29.
And what was the amendment there, Kara?
Just an LEA should report the data to the superintendent as prescribed, or as prescribed by the superintendent. It's a little repetitive, but don't in a form and through a platform and on paper.
And prepositional activity.
Yeah.
Should you be
Let's just diagram.
Why don't we?
Well, that's kind of what Jenny and I can. That's fun for us. That's why we're on this committee, I guess. And then there was another one too, Janet. The superintendent shall compile on line 33. The superintendent shall compile the data to form an aggregate report that complies with the. It just shall compile the data consistent with, and then get rid of all to form an aggregate report that the requirements of blah 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 blah.
Okay.
And then you've got the grammar change consistent with grammar.
I've been making a note of the changes.
Do we
here.
want to?
So the question is, we've made these amendments to the rule. Are we okay to put that as a draft 3 and then bring it forward to the rest of the board?
Well, I'm just wondering what the time frame is on this, because I would always prefer seeing it written before we suggest it goes on.
I think
But unless there's a.
that's why we're getting all these rules that are kind of messy. No,
they're trying to rush them all.
I think by me. I'm just the guy who got to sign them. So.
Good one.
That's a terrible thing to say. I read. You're not supposed to say blah 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 blah. Insult. No offense.
No, this we are behind on having the.
Well, then let's go ahead.
Okay, so then let's go ahead.
One more,
and
Janet.
Darren has some information.
Just a question. You mentioned that schools aren't required by the statute till 2020 to do the reporting.
Correct.
There's nowhere in this rule that says that. So I'm wondering if you wanted to add on line 27 and 28, where you put the requirement, where we put the requirement for September 1, beginning in the year.
Yeah.
Because it's in the statute.
I guess you'd need it in the year. They have to have the report in 2020, so does it need to be by 2019?
The 1928,
Yeah.
That way, if you get the statute
Get the right year there.
you can adjust this.
Okay, one more in our effort to grammatize this. The purpose of this rule is to establish, the purpose of this rule is to generate the report. So on line 11, purpose of this rule is to, and then skip everything from establish to generate.
Okay.
And I feel a little better about it.
Compiling mechanism that will be required. Yes, I agree.
Okay.
And with all those changes, I move that we, as amended, I move that we pass this on first reading and send it to the board. Draft 3. Draft 3.
And
In the form of draft 3.
And maybe we need to remember to look at this one a week before when it gets posted.
Yes.
Or maybe you could email us when it's.
I'd be happy to send it
That'd
as
be
soon as it's ready.
To the committee.
Okay. So I have the action written down as approve R277-912 as amended in the form of draft 3 on first reading and forward recommendation for approval to the board for second and final. Okay?
Great.
All right, then
As always, thank you.
all those in favor?
We have to take a vote.
Let's vote first. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
now you can.
now you can.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback and all that you did provide me. It's really helpful.
Okay, so
Glad you had that extra minute.
that brings us to health standards.
Right.
Just the definition.
Information item.
No voting here, information item. All right, Jody has gone through and created for us definition of terms, right?
Yep, just health terms and then some law and policy. This was requested last month in this committee to help with some of the terms that are used in the draft of the health standards. So just kind of as a reminder from last month, there were some questions about what some of the words would mean for the teachers. And this document would be available to the teachers. It would be a resource posted on the website. It would also be sent to like the curriculum directors and the district and charter specialists. So it's a guide that supplements the standards. At this point, it is not part of the standards.
Okay, so
and board member Cannon, I did already change the couple little grammatical things from our meeting.
okay,
It doesn't appear on your, because it wasn't re-uploaded, but I did go into my personal document and I fixed the spelling error.
thank you.
You're doing a work for us. I know. Fun is that?
I haven't.
Okay, go ahead, Elisa.
Well, I can foresee concerns about the definition of abstinence because I understand abstinence from all of these behaviors.
And there's also, I don't mean to.
So you might know what I'm talking about. Okay. I was going to say, it looks like an afterthought, and so I know that that'll be a concern.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not an afterthought, it's, it was intentionally too different. When we're talking about
No, thank you. I
substance abuse,
missed that one.
abstinence from substances, and then there's sexual abstinence.
Well, that's
as
what
well.
I'm still not. So it's all the way in S.
Sexual.
So this is the problem.
Yeah, there's sexual abstinence and abstinence.
But if this is made available, people are going to only see that first one and then split their first.
So I'm looking at draft 5. Should I be looking at something?
No,
No,
it's
you're at the
just
wrong
go down.
thing. So go
Health
down.
education, these are
Okay.
these are definitions
There we
that
She was just at the wrong spot on
Yeah, I
the
was.
board
Just
docs.
you've been avoidance of harmful behaviors.
Thank you for putting this together.
So I had I looked at these and then I went back and was reading through the standards. And I thought, okay, so what don't I understand about these? And I guess that is defined in here. And one of the things that I thought, our standards talk about a trusted adult. And I thought, that seems nebulous to me. And how do we know who would
that needs to be
qualify as a trusted adult in the standards is there.
I'd like to see that defined also.
But it's part of the discussion, right? Like in the standards.
So I don't know if you could define a trusted adult as a teacher or a principal.
Well, there's a legal definition.
Is there?
There's a legal definition in Utah code that means for which offenses are enhanced if the person's, and I'm not exactly sure if it uses trusted or
Power.
Position.
well, position of trust. It's in a position of trust. But I don't know that that's the best definition to take from, but I also don't want to be confused with that.
But I just thought, if I were someone reading those with an eye to having to implement them, it would really help me to have some background information on who would be considered a trusted adult and how that would move forward.
But it's so in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Well,
it feels like part of the
It
discussion.
could be an uncle, could be but maybe an uncle's not good.
Yeah,
It could be
maybe
a
an
dad.
uncle's not
Sometimes a dad's not good.
I
We
know.
have a comment.
Okay, comment. Who's commenting? Linda?
I would just be really hesitant to ever put a definition on a trusted adult by naming it in terms because by definition, it's really dependent on that person. So if you start saying you could provide examples, but the
But don't say
person, the person has to, you could say, well, a teacher, always go to your teacher. Teacher's a
Well,
trusted adult, but to some kids, that teacher may not be they may not feel comfortable and define them as that trusted adult, even though it's not that they're not trustworthy, but it's so personal.
Well, you don't know where abuse situations
The
are.
programs that help
Or even
teach
comfort.
children that to report incidences to a trusted adult, we're very hesitant to ever define what that is for that child, but help them identify how they could define that person.
But I guess the kids wouldn't be the ones reading or implementing the standards. The standards would be read by teachers or those who are going to implement them. I'm just wondering if we could give some kind of guidance to them as to what to look for.
Right. We don't have to say it's your uncle, your mom, dad, your teacher, because in any given situation, you may have a student that any one of those people could be the one that's harming them. So, but you can come up with a way to help teach a student how to identify a trusted adult.
Yeah, I think that's
I don't
a good
know
way,
the best
a
way
to
to write that,
identify.
but
Take a stab at it, Jody.
Yeah.
Unless
but I know
it's-
that that's a common concern amongst people that are looking at the standards.
And the other term that was concerning to me in the standards was, in many places, it says demonstrate this and demonstrate that. And
I know.
I don't know, that just
Well,
seems rather nebulous.
I just thought it was interesting because it was mentioned last month that it had to begin with a verb, and so as we were looking through the CTE standards, just looking at other verbs, and I think learn is also a verb. And so some, learn refusal skills. Instead of demonstrating them, you can learn what some of them are. You learn what the definition is. And so I think that could alleviate some of the concern. And so I think I would like to look at all of those, but I think there's other ways to use a verb if that's really the way that they want this written, that isn't,
I'm worried about that in the section. Are you worried about that just because these are the sex education standards?
Well,
I
know, all the way through,
I was
they just demonstrate a lot.
Well,
And
I was
thought,
uncomfortable
this
with
could be
argue.
uneasy.
Well, and I will argue that demonstrate, you talk about when you learn something best, you practice refusal skills, for example. And so I would argue from a teaching perspective that demonstrate is going to get us
I think it's
in a better place.
It's less uncertain than
Because it's not
learn.
demonstrate in inappropriate ways. It's practicing saying no. It's practicing.
Right, but it's also practicing saying no, then yes. So that's a concern for me, a big concern for me. But I also push to not have that in the bill at all, because just looking at consent is concerning, and when we turn refusal skills and just say all of a sudden we're going to turn it into consent by saying yes, then that is a very big concern to me.
But would they do that?
Well, they
Can
said
you
we're going to
comment?
practice saying no,
Yeah.
then yes, no, then yes. That's all of a sudden flipping refusal to consent.
So by definition, we'll never grab it to your ask.
Yeah.
In statute refusal skills, is to refuse an unwanted sexual advance, to stop an unwanted advance when refused by another. It is right there. In reporting and counseling, seeking counseling for an unwanted sexual advance, sexual harassment, and then the electronic submission of unwanted sexual images of oneself or of another to another. I've read it once or twice. Can you? So to demonstrate a refusal skills, you would be somehow, and demonstrate doesn't mean that it's verbal either. You can demonstrate through writing. You can demonstrate through a brochure, a project, a research. You can demonstrate. It doesn't have to be
role playing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. But you wouldn't be doing like,
but I know
yes, like you wouldn't be practicing.
Well, but that was last week what was brought up.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
teach them role play no, and then yes, and that was like a huge like, what? That's exactly what I'm concerned about. So
no, it's a good.
Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman, and that was in reference to.
We were talking about refusal skill.
And the example that it came from was a lesson out of Baughman Life Skills. That's talking about ways to accept what other people's answer. It's a personal boundary lesson, which would not be part of
sexual stuff
at all. When they would do that Baughman lesson, it would correlate with either the protective factors when we're talking about personal boundaries, or it would be with peer pressure in substance abuse prevention. So it wouldn't correlate to these strands.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, I'm just, where I was sitting with refusal skills, there was the sexual abstinence. I'm just thinking, because I'm thinking that I would like this to be made available to the public. And I don't want everyone to jump to the same conclusion just by looking at abstinence. So I'm wondering if we say tobacco use and sexual activity, and then you just put a little parentheses that says as defined below.
See sexual abstinence
or
something
like
like that.
That's a good because then it's there. It's not. They don't have to be like, what? You put it as the last thing.
Okay. So if we added a note right here, I want to get this right.
Yes.
If we added a note at the end of this that would like see sexual abstinence
definition or
Okay.
Here's another more.
Yeah. Okay.
What's the purpose of these definitions, Jody?
So the purpose of these would be for teachers.
For teachers.
Yep. Whether it's so, some of these terms are because they don't exist in the current standards. For example, disordered eating is a more accurate term, but it's not currently used. We use eating disorders, but eating disorder is a clinical diagnosis and not very common. Disordered eating is incredibly common, which would be a more accurate thing to teach. That would be something that a teacher, when they're looking through the standards, when we have this draft through, if they were looking through and they saw disordered eating, then they would have this as a reference. Oh, I know what that is.
Now,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Now, see if this is a concern for anybody other than me. If these are put out for that purpose to help teachers and to some extent, not to some extent, also to help parents understand what their children are being taught. But these are not definitions in a rule, so they're not legally binding. Do we care that there is in another place a different definition of sexual harassment, or a different definition of of pornography, or a different definition, because they're not legally, these are just illustrative, these are helpful. But that means that if someone says, yes, according to this, I experienced sexual harassment, well, that's not the legal definition that's in R277- blah, blah. So this either has to be incorporated by reference in the eventual rule.
I would like to see it incorporated by reference, and then I would also think that it needs to follow.
And then the consistency has to be checked against other documents that have the same language. Otherwise, it's just, we just have to say to people or to teachers that this is helpful to you, but not necessarily controlling language. You see what I'm saying? Does that bother anybody?
I see what you're saying, and I agree.
I think that's wise.
So must be incorporated by reference in
the rule.
The rule.
So that it's.
But we're not talking about a rule.
No, we're talking about standards. I would like to see it referenced in the standards.
But the standards are eventually adopted in a rule ever? I'm trying to remember.
So
I don't think
incorporated by reference in the standards.
At least that. Yeah, let's start there, and then we'll see where it goes.
And their consistency checked within other rules.
With other rules and the law too. Well, the rules are law if they're.
And other rules.
And
listen, yeah.
And Utah code.
And some of them are not. Some of them are not specific to Utah code. I get really annoyed. Pornography is misused constantly.
Well, it is defined in code.
And it is, so if we can at least
That's
make
what
it
I would like to
consistently.
see it consistently.
Yeah.
So.
But going to the EBSCO thing, so they did violate it as defined in code.
Jody, would you be able to just check out these definitions and determine if they're consistent within other rule and code and bring them back to us?
Of course.
Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah.
Because I think that would go forward to making these pretty valuable. And
May I ask a clarifying question?
Uh-huh.
So there was the request that we would reference that these are available on standards. Is that what is requested? So this isn't part of the standards.
So
no, but it can be referenced in
we're
the
thinking that these would be incorporated by reference in the standards. So in the standards, do you have reference documents as supporting documents to the standards?
No, but they reference statute, so you could just reference.
Yeah, so there are some that say as in Utah code.
Yeah.
Yes.
We didn't say the code.
You just say in general.
They should. I would. That's the recommendation I would make when we go through these 90-day public comments.
It should, but my concern is a little different. If you want these to be legally binding, which maybe is not important, then they have to be incorporated by reference in some document that is legally binding. So if you want to just make sure we're consistent, that's a different discussion. And that's why I'm saying, for now, let's just make sure they're consistent, and then we get to the point of adopting the standards, and then we can talk about how that officially happens.
Okay, so step one would be to check our definitions here and confirm that these definitions are consistent with other rules in Utah code.
Yes.
So that would be the next step, right?
Yeah, that's what I see it. And there's a whole blend of stuff. I mean, basic nutrients, body image, caloric intake, that stuff's not going to be anywhere in the law, but then there's some stuff that is.
Will be. And there's some definitions that definitely need to follow
Cyberbullying, pornography.
Well, and the sexual harassment, I think all of those
Sexual
are good terms
harassment.
because if they don't follow statute, there's legal.
I think it's misleading for teachers as well as then people can't depend on it as the controlling definition. It's not enforceable.
Okay, so there's some in here that you've checked with code.
Right.
I think we're done.
So you're okay with what we're asking you to do there? And we have some time to work on this. Would it be asking too much for you to bring this back at our next meeting, or do you need longer than that?
January.
Can I refrain from answering that right now?
Yeah, wait till we're at our executive
December or
session.
January is fine. Yeah. December or January.
Okay. Yeah, because we're on a 90-day public input schedule right now, so
you have some
right.
time.
And these could change. What words are in here based on public comment? If the draft will absolutely have changes. Depending on what those changes are, we could have to add words. We could have to
Sure.
So this wouldn't necessarily need to be, in my opinion, completed the second that the 90 day is up either.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, it's
So we're happy to work with you on it. Let us know what works, and I think you have an idea of what the committee's thinking as well. Okay? All right. Other things to come before the committee?
better run.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye. Thank you. Sorry again, I was late.
I wanted to grade.
I want to do something a long way.
Well, I didn't today.
2 hours.
I was sick yesterday, but I already booked a room down here. But I decided to.
You are the only participant.